My name is Emily Carter, and the day my life changed forever was supposed to be one of the happiest days of my life. It was our graduation ceremony. Mine and my brother Ryan's. We had both completed our degrees the same year at Westfield University in Manchester, England. I graduated with honors in accounting. Ryan barely scraped through business administration. But in our family, the detail never seemed to matter much. Dad had rented a hall just outside the village of Ashford in Kent. The whole family had come. Cousins, aunts, uncles, old family friends from the neighborhood. There were flowers on every table and a banner that said congratulations in gold letters. Mum was wearing her best dress. Ryan was already laughing too loudly at one end of the room the way he always did. I thought maybe this time would be different. Maybe this time Dad would look at both of us equally. Maybe after everything I had quietly done for this family over the years, I would finally get the recognition I had long since earned. I was wrong. Dad picked up the microphone, called Ryan to the front and handed him a check. £1 million to start his own business. He called it an investment in the family's future. The whole hall erupted in applause. Then Dad walked over to me. He smiled, calmly, gently, the way you close a door you never plan to open again. He said, "Emily, go earn your own." That was it. No check. No announcement. No applause, just one sentence delivered in front of everyone I had ever known. And not a single person in that room said a word against it. I smiled. I thanked him. I sat back down, but something inside me that night never came back. The hope that had lived quietly in my chest for years, the hope that maybe one day Dad would truly see me. That hope died in that hall, and something colder and far more useful took its place. Welcome to Drama Stories Hub. Today's story is about a girl who was handed a sentence at her graduation while her brother was handed £1 million. And what she did with that sentence over the next 12 months is the reason a lawyer would one day slide an envelope across a table and make her father scream like a man completely losing his mind. Stay with me. This one is earned. I need you to understand who I was before that night so you understand what that night truly meant. In our family, Ryan brought the energy into every room. I brought the spreadsheets. He was 2 years younger and treated like the golden child straight out of a fairy tale. I was the one who did the taxes. I started keeping our family's books at 19, the year our family's accountant resigned suddenly and nobody else could read a ledger. We lived in a small town called Harrowfield in Yorkshire, and Dad ran a timber supply business that had been in our family for decades. I caught a vendor double billing us £6,000. I never received a single thank you. I just got handed more responsibility. By 25, had passed my CPA exams and taken a position at a small accounting firm 2 towns over in Doncaster. My family knew my job title and never once asked what I actually did with it. Mum had a way of summarizing my entire existence that I could never quite shake. She had said it years before, kindly, the way she said most of the worst things. Ryan carries the name. You just have it. I used to think that was wisdom. Driving home from the graduation hall that night through the dark Yorkshire roads, I finally heard it for what it truly was. I didn't cry. I want to be honest about that because people expect tears at this point in a story. I made tea, opened a fresh notebook, and at the top of the very first page I wrote the only thing I was certain of: start. I didn't know what I was starting. I only knew I was done waiting to be chosen. The next morning I drove out to my grandfather's office at the family timber yard on the edge of Harrowfield. Grandfather George was 81 years old. He had built the entire family business from one flatbed lorry and a bad knee back in the early 70s. He was the only person in our family I had ever truly respected without reservation. He was already there when I arrived because George was always already there. His old blue enamel mug sat on the counter where it had sat for as long as I could remember. He poured me a tea I hadn't asked for and slid it across the counter without a word. I told him about the graduation, about the check, about what Dad had said in front of everyone. I expected sympathy, maybe a quiet apology on my father's behalf. George didn't offer either. He looked at me over that old mug and asked one question. So what's the plan? Not are you okay? Not that isn't fair. Not your father should be ashamed of himself. What is the plan? I started to say I didn't have one. Then I stopped. Because I did. I had written it down the night before in a single word. He listened while I talked it through. This half-formed idea of doing for struggling small businesses what I had always done for free for my own family. Clean books, honest money. A real way out of debt. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said the line I would carry like a stone in my pocket for the entire next year. I'm not betting on the loud one. I'm betting on the one who shows up. Outside, the first rain of the day began to tick against the tin roof of the yard office. He told me to come back the next day. He said he wanted to show me the old books. I didn't know why yet. My first real client found me entirely by accident. His name was Thomas Webb, and he ran a one-man repair workshop off the high street in Harrowfield. The kind of place that fixes your boiler and your outlook on life in the same afternoon. Thomas was drowning. He owed 3 suppliers. His books were a showbox of crumpled receipts. The bank had stopped returning his calls entirely. A mutual friend mentioned that the Carter girl from the accounting firm was good with numbers. He called me on a Tuesday, embarrassed, fully prepared to be talked down to. I didn't have money to lend him. I want to be clear about that because this is where people expect a wealthy relative to appear and rescue everyone. There was no wealthy relative. There was just me and a notebook. So I did the only thing I knew how to do well. I went through every single number in that showbox. I restructured what he owed. I found him a small line of credit at a local credit union that still believed in handshakes. I renegotiated 2 of his supplier contracts down to something a human being could actually pay. I charged him a fair fee and wrote a proper sign agreement so we both knew exactly where we stood. That night I gave the whole thing a name. I wrote it across the top of a new file. Carter Ventures.it wasn't a fund yet. It wasn't anything yet. It was a name and a promise to keep the books clean. 2 weeks later, Thomas sent me 2 more business owners from his street. They came in embarrassed. They left with a plan. Meanwhile, my brother Ryan was throwing a launch party with his £1 million. He leased an office in Leeds with exposed brick walls and a glass front. The kind of office that costs more to look successful and than to actually be successful. He hired a friend to design a logo, another friend to manage social media, a third friend nobody could properly explain. The launch had a fully stocked bar and my parents came dressed like they were attending a wedding reception. I went because not going would have been a statement and I wasn't ready to make statements. Yet, I stood near the back and watched the money move in entirely the wrong direction. At one point a man Ryan was trying to impress as an investor drifted over to me, mistaking me for someone on the catering staff, and asked a genuine question about profit margins. I answered it plainly. He blinked, then asked another question, and another, and we talked numbers for 10 solid minutes while Ryan watched from across the room. I saw my brother's smile tighten considerably. He liked it even less when the man shook my hand instead of his. On the way out, by midsummer, I had 6 clients, then 8. Carter Ventures stopped being a name on a file and started being a small, stubborn engine that ran on clean books and honest work. The work cost me everything else. I was at the firm by 7, working my own clients until 10 at night, and asleep before I remembered to eat properly. Most evenings I would stop by the yard with papers for grandfather George even when I didn't strictly need to. He had started asking me questions that went much deeper than a grandfather making polite conversation. How did I structure the small deals? What happened to a client's debt if a business folded? Who held the risk and who held the paper? He asked the way a man asks when he is quietly measuring something important. One rainy evening, the rain ticking on the tin roof again, he asked me to write everything down for him. The whole shape of how Carter Ventures worked. I made him a clean one-page summary and didn't think twice about it. I should have asked him why he wanted it. A week later, he called me out to the yard. When I arrived, Thomas Webb was already standing by the counter, cap in his hands, looking like a man who had been called to witness something significant. Grandfather George had his blue mug in one hand and a single sheet of paper in the other. He set the paper on the counter between us, and the smell of cut pine and engine oil. It was a term sheet, a simple one-page investment agreement written in plain language the way he liked things. George wished to invest £30,000 into Carter Ventures, written as a real investment with real terms, a proper return, and a signature line. I looked up at him, and for once in my life I had absolutely nothing clever to say. Why, Thomas? I asked. Because something this important should have a witness, he said. I signed. He signed, his hand slower than it once was but completely steady on the line. Thomas signed beneath us both. George slid my copy across the counter and said the line he had been saying to me all year, but now with something new at the end that changed its entire weight. I'm not betting on the loud one. I'm betting on the one who shows up. Now it's in writing. I folded that single page and put it in my bag against my chest like it was worth more than the £30,000. It was. I just didn't know yet how much more. Grandfather George passed away quietly that winter after a short illness that moved fast enough to be a mercy and slow enough to say a proper goodbye. The whole town came to the service. He had helped build half their homes and they remembered him well for it. I made all the arrangements my father was too proud and my mother too undone to handle. I wrote the obituary. I chose the hymns. I did it all with dry eyes because my grief comes late and alone. Never on schedule and never in public. My father, even in the receiving line at the funeral, was quietly asking our family solicitor under his breath when would the will be read. How soon? His own father was 3 days in the ground and he was already counting. 2 weeks later, we gathered in the conference room of a solicitor named Margaret Holt in the town center of Doncaster. My father took the head of the table without being asked, like a man who had already decided how the morning would end. Ryan slouched beside him scrolling his phone, bored or performing boredom. Mum sat to Dad's right with her hands folded neatly. Margaret opened her leather folder and the very first thing she said completely rearranged the room. George, she explained, had not left a simple will. Years earlier, with her assistance, he had placed the bulk of his assets into a living trust. On his death, that trust had become irrevocable. His estate would pass under its terms privately, exactly as he had arranged. Outside of probate entirely, my father's expression changed in a way I had never seen before. A trust was a closed door he hadn't known was locked. What does that mean for the business? He asked, and for the first time there was something underneath his confidence that sounded very much like fear. Margaret looked at him with the calm patience of someone who has seen this exact moment 100 times before. It means, she said, we follow Mr. Carter's instructions exactly. Outside, the first rain began to tap gently against the window. I heard it before anyone else did. It sounded exactly like the tin roof at the yard. Margaret worked through the smaller bequests first, unhurried and precise. George's tools went to 2 old yard workers by name, a university fund for the younger grandchildren, a generous sum set aside for my mother, clean and with no conditions attached, which made her cry in a way I hadn't expected and didn't enjoy watching. Ryan received a bequest as well. The old flatbed lorry George had started the business with back in 1972, and £10,000. I watched my brother's face do the mathematics in real time. He had walked into that room expecting grandfather to refill the account he had already completely drained. Instead, he received a 50-year-old lorry and a sentence about hard work. He set his phone face down on the table. For once he had absolutely nothing to sell. My father sat very still. He was waiting for the only line that mattered to him. The controlling stake in Carter Timber and Supply. the foundation his entire financial life now leaned on. Margaret reached it slowly and carefully. Before she announced who received it, she read aloud the condition George had attached. The room went so quiet I could hear the rain outside against the glass. The controlling interest, she said, was to pass to the heir who had during George's lifetime built a business or a fund of their own, and had it properly documented, in writing with real financial consideration, and a witness present. Every person around that table did the same arithmetic and arrived one by one at the same answer that nobody in that room had prepared themselves for. My father's hands went completely flat on the table. Margaret reached into the folder and drew out a plain white envelope. My name was written on the front in George's handwriting, the letters a little unsteady but unmistakably his. She slid it down the full length of the table toward me. It traveled past my father, past my mother, past Ryan, and every single eye in that room followed it like it was the last lifeboat on the water. Mr. Carter asked that you open this here, Margaret said, in front of everyone. My father found his voice immediately. This is completely absurd, he said loudly. She kept the books once or twice. That doesn't make her. Margaret raised one hand quietly and he stopped. Because solicitors in their own conference rooms carry an authority that even very angry men tend to recognize. Mr. Carter was very specific, she said. Please, Emily. I placed my hand on that envelope and felt the entire year press up through the paper. The graduation hall in Ashford, the notebook on my kitchen table, Thomas Webb's cap in his hands, the blue enamel mug on the counter, the rain on the tin roof, the slow, steady scratch of an old man's signature on a single page. I slid my thumb under the flap. Inside were two things: a letter and a sheet of trust documentation. The official page confirmed everything Margaret had begun to say. Under the trust, the controlling interest in Carter Timber and Supply passed to me as the heir who had built and documented a fund during George's lifetime. The proof named specifically was a one-page term sheet dated the previous spring, signed by George Carter, by Emily Carter, and by one witness. The £30,000 hadn't only been a bet on me. It had been the key he had cut months in advance to a door he knew I would one day need to walk through. Then I read the letter. It was short. It said he was sorry he wasn't there to see my face. It said he had watched a man hand £1 million to the loud child and a single sentence to the steady one at a graduation ceremony, and he had decided that very day to do something about it the only way he ever trusted, with paper and patience. And it ended with the line he had been saying to me for an entire year, finished at last: I'm not betting on the loud one. I bet on the one who showed up. You earned your name long before anyone gave you a single penny. It was always yours, Emily. I just made it official. I put the letter down, to tears. No more. Because I was still in a room full of people and I had not come this far to fall apart now. Then I looked up, and my father came completely apart instead. He said it was a mistake. He said George had been confused in his final months, manipulated, taken advantage of by a calculating daughter. His voice rose until it filled the conference room and spilled out into the corridor. Mum put her hand on his sleeve and he shook it straight off. Margaret let him exhaust the worst of it. Then she spoke in the same measured tone she had maintained all morning. The trust had been established years earlier while George was entirely competent, reviewed and witnessed and properly documented at every step. Contesting it, she said carefully, would be difficult and extremely costly, and in her considerable experience, arrangements built this carefully tend to hold. She didn't promise he had no case. Good solicitors never promise the weather. She simply made it clear that he would be spending money he no longer possessed to chase a door that was already permanently locked. That was the moment the real terror reached his face, because my father wasn't simply losing an argument. He was losing the foundation his entire life had been constructed on. He had borrowed against the inheritance he expected from George. He had spent his father's estate before his father was even gone. and now none of it was coming to him. I stood up, not to shout him down. I have never won anything in my life by being the loudest person in a room, and I was not about to start in my grandfather's name. I waited until the room was completely quiet, until even my father ran out of breath and simply stood there staring across the table at me. Then I reached into my bag and placed the term sheet on the table where every single person in that room could see it. Clearly, 3 signatures, a date from the previous spring. George's hand completely and undeniably steady. If anyone in this room wants to argue that my grandfather didn't know exactly what he was doing, I said quietly, here is his hand. Read it. Nobody moved to read it. They didn't need to. They could see it perfectly well from where they sat, and they could all see my father seeing it. Then I looked directly at him, the man who had handed me a single sentence at our graduation ceremony in front of everyone we had ever known. I kept my voice as level as Margaret's had been all morning. You told me to go earn my own, I said. So I did. This is what my own looks like. I didn't gloat. I didn't list his failures one by one. I told the room plainly what would happen next because someone needed to keep the books. I would keep Carter Timber open. I would make sure every worker received their wages. The men at the yard would keep their jobs and their livelihoods. I would sit down honestly with the bank and restructure my father's loan into something survivable. I would offer Ryan a genuine position, not a gift, a real job with real hours and real targets that he would actually have to meet. My brother looked up at that last part, and for the first time in his adult life he had absolutely nothing to say in response. In the quiet after I finished, my mother looked at the term sheet on the table and the letter beside it and said something almost entirely to herself. She wasn't addressing anyone in particular. She carries the name now. A year before she had told me Ryan carried the name and I just had it. Now she had watched her own father-in-law put in writing which child had actually earned it. I gathered the letter and the term sheet, slid them carefully back into the envelope, and stood. I told Margaret I would call her first thing in the morning to begin the real work. Then I walked out of that conference room, through the corridor, and out the front door of the building into the open Yorkshire air. The rain had passed while I wasn't paying attention. The pavement was wet and shining, and the sky had broken open to a thin, cold winter light. I drove out to the yard on the edge of Harrowfield, let myself in with the key George had pressed into my hand on his last truly clear day, stood inside in the smell of sawdust and cut pine in the building my grandfather had started with one lorry in 1972. The blue enamel mug sat on the counter exactly where it always sat. I picked it up, turned it slowly in my hands, set it back down in its place, because some things you don't move. You just keep them exactly where they belong. The last drops of rain fell from the tin roof in a slow, steady rhythm, like a ledger finally balancing after years of crooked entries. He had told me to go earn my own, and I had. Here is the only lesson I will leave you with today. A name that is given to you can always be taken back, but a name you earn yourself with your own 2 hands and a set of clean, honest books is yours for good. And no announcement at any graduation ceremony in any rented hall can ever call it back. If this story reached you today, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Drop a comment below, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one right here on Drama Stories Hub.